Okay, hello everyone, and welcome along to our week 8 Write Your Journal article in 12 weeks community of practice session. My name is Kerry, and I am your moderator, and let's get started. And just to begin, QT acknowledges the Turrbal and Yagara as the First Nations owners of the lands where QT now stands. We pay respect to their elders, laws, customs, and creation spirits and recognise these lands have always been places of teaching, research, and learning, and acknowledge the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play within the QT community. All right, so, that says week 7. It's supposed to say week 8. There we go, magic. So, a little bit of a welcome, seeing if anyone has some questions. And today we're talking about claims for significance. Now, I know we did that a couple of weeks ago, but it is a really important part of your article. And so we are going to look at some exemplars and really unpack that difference between claims for significance and the problem. I'm hoping some people are going to want to seek feedback today, since that is an important part of your draft writing. Let's see how we go. All right, so at the moment, does anyone have any questions at all? Okay, good. So no questions at the moment. Just so you know, there's another one of these community of practice sessions, Wednesday, 27th of May. That's in week 11 of the module. Now, I won't have anything prepared slides and activity wise. What I really want you to do in that week 11 is come for seeking feedback. That's our whole reason for being there. And also, we've got our Researcher Feedback Hub sessions in week 10. There's one on the 19th of May, one on the 27th of May. Again, that's all about feedback. You are very welcome to come to those as well. And I'll put all the information into the announcements of the relevant week. So, realistically, these are the 3 opportunities for feedback outside of your peer feedback groups. So hopefully a few of you can come for that. So, claims for significance is what I wanted to talk about today. And what I'm wondering is, are you super clear about the difference between the argument and the claims for significance? And second question, what type of claims have you got in your article? Now, let me just pop the activity sheet into the chat, because that in the activity sheet I've actually popped all the different claims. So 1 second and I'll get that up. There we go. All right. So even if you want to write into the chat, well, actually, yeah, write in the chat if you know your type of claims. And I'll just open that activity sheet myself. 1 second. Computer's very slow. All right, good. I've got that. Yeah. Okay, let's have a look. So to get us thinking, you can see here I've pulled out what Belcher says about the claims for significance. Basically that they're essential. But fortunately, they don't take up much space. They're often just 3 or 4 sentences in the introduction and a few in the conclusion, and maybe you won't mention them in the rest of the article, which is unlike the argument, which is your research problem, remember? So the argument and the research problem is what you keep coming back to because you're gaining the insight into that problem. So the claims for significance are about the so what. Why do we care about this problem? So it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? We would definitely be talking about it in the introduction and in the abstract, a sentence as well. Um, and um, Yeah, so although the claims are among the shortest parts of the article, they're among the toughest parts to write, which is interesting for Belcher to say that. She says you don't need to categorize and divide them up for them to work, as long as there is a claim that aligns with the argument and the entry point into the scholarly conversation, the gap. So that's interesting, isn't it? So remember, your problem is about the stakeholders, okay? This is a problem that's impacting them, right, in a negative way. So the so what, why do we care? And part of the why do we care is you're adding to the scholarly conversation, the gap, right? And you're going to be adding your brick into the wall, your insight. So we want the claims to align with the argument and the gaps in the scholarly conversation. And the types of claims, which is in that activity sheet I just uploaded, which we're going to look at as well in a minute, they're the prompts for your thinking rather than strict categories. All right, so great. Thank you. In the chat, we've got my claim. This paper introduces an emerging UX design framework for digital health products, contributing a practical resource to assist interaction designers in crafting inclusive healthcare solutions. Okay, great. So you're coming up with a resource. So that's something practical that can be used in the health system. And then there's another one, a design framework that details the needs of users with a specific health condition can support e-health teams. Ah, nice. Okay, so it's specific to e-health, which is a growing part, isn't it? Which is excellent. Um, can support teams and provide them with a foundational resource prior to their engagement with users. Okay, great. And that is your so what. All right, perfect. That'll be good when we look at that more closely when we see your writing. All right, thank you for sharing. And one second. All right, so the thing with the claims for significance and why they're different to the research problem, as we said, it's the so what. Why is this research important and for who? Is about the research problem, and then we need to persuade about the study being significant and valuable. And also, don't forget that you want to be very clear about the significance and value of your research to your audience, right? Your journal audience, which brings us back to why selecting the most appropriate journal is really important as well. So keep that in your mind that whoever your audience is. So, with our previous example, is your journal, um, the journal that you're submitting to, is that a practitioner's reading that? Because if so, then I can see your claims for significance that you put into the chat will be valuable for them, right? All right. So, Sophie, have you got, you probably haven't got there the activity sheet. Let me just pop it in again. And it doesn't want to do it. Goodness me. All right, let's have a look at this example. Now, this one is in the content, which is that book, by the way, The Craft of Research, is excellent. Fully recommend it. It would be in your university library. We could say, oh, it's a bit old, but The Craft of Research hasn't really changed. So, great book. So, what we're going to do is have a look at this example and see if we can find the argument, the claims, the evidence, and another important thing is acknowledging contentions. which we often have in our fields of study. So it's in your activity sheet, but it's also here on the screen. I like this example because we can all understand the topic. So television can have harmful psychological effects on children because when they are constantly exposed to violent images, they come to think violence is natural. Children who are often exposed to violent visual entertainment tend to adopt the values of what they see, and constant exposure to violent images makes children unable to distinguish fantasy from reality. Smith found that children aged 5 to 7 who watched more than 3 hours of violent television a day were 25% more likely to say that what they saw on television was really happening. Although some children who watch violent entertainment might already be attracted to violence, Jones argues that children with no predisposition to violence were as attracted to violent images as those with a violent history. This contention in current knowledge indicates the need for further investigation into the impact violent TV images have on children to provide parents with evidence-based guidance on how best to manage their children's TV habits. Now, we're looking at one paragraph, right? And oftentimes you would not have all these elements in one paragraph. But this makes it easier for us to be able to pull it apart because it's not too big. So one thing I notice about this paragraph is those first two sentences are in the writer's voice. And I really want you to remember how important your voice is in your article. Yes, you need citations and sources, but they are the evidence and the underpinning of your voice, you know. So depending on your field of study, I would really encourage you to start most of your paragraphs with your voice. Then the evidence comes afterwards, because what I often see as the first sentence of an article or first sentence of a paragraph or a section is a citation, right? And I just don't think that that's the best practice. I feel like we should be, because you are offering your expertise and your research findings. You can have a voice, right? You have arguments, and you have and you have your claims, and so that's what that's one other reason why I like this as a like a model. The other thing is there's a little bit of hedging there. Television can have. But then the second sentence, well, yeah, there's a bit of hedging there too, isn't it? Tend to adopt. So we've still got the fairly strong language, but there's a little bit of hedging in there. Um, one second. Okay, good. In the chat, we've had a question about when is it okay to use your voice, and at what point are you providing the evidence, particularly with this example here and the second sentence there. That again, that's a statement of something occurring, right? And the author actually hasn't put a reference for that second sentence. So the answer to that is it depends on your field of study, but also what are the commonest, so with if you think about your field of study, what are the common assumptions that your readers would already kind of have, right? So that's one way to answer it. So if you're a physicist, for example, there would be facts and truths that everybody would know, and they wouldn't need to cite. Now, obviously, this is far from a hard science, this example we're looking at right now. But I think so. The idea would be that they're saying that sentences 3 and 4 are actually the evidence for what they've previously said. So so Smith found children aged 5 to 7 were likely to say that what they saw was really happening. And so that kind of attaches, doesn't it, to the second part of sentence 2. Children are unable to distinguish fantasy from reality, right? And they've used that tend to adopt the values of what they see and constant exposure. So constant exposure, they're probably more than 3 hours of violent television a day. I'm not sure why 5 to 7 year olds are watching violent TV, but regardless, um, maybe they're watching those Roadrunner cartoons or something like that. They were quite violent. And then sentence four, that's probably bringing up another. See how that, well, that's the contention, right? And the fact that there's contention in this brings us back to why are we doing it in the first place. So I suppose if we think of the problem, that's sentence one, right? Harmful psychological effects. That's the research problem. Who are the stakeholders? The parents mainly, right? And of course the children. And society, I guess, if we drew it right out. So problem is sentence one. Sentence two is probably another part of the problem. Well, actually, let's go to the next slide because I've actually got a highlighting. So yeah, so argument, problem, and the evidence is Smith and Jones, and contention. And so what I really want us to think about is the claims for significance. Why do we care about this research problem? Well, they might think violence is natural. And then we've got the idea of the contention in current knowledge. So here's where we're starting to get into the gap, right? And remember what Belcher said with your claims for significance is to think about linking to the problem. Okay, so the problem is the harmful psychological effects, and then they're going to think violence is natural. And the other part of it, she also says, is well, how are you entering into the scholarly conversation? Which remember we did in those weeks when we were talking about your claims for significance. So, and I think it's important, exactly actually, Ali, when you put into the chat about your claims, it was very clear you're coming up with a resource, okay, to help practitioners do their job for their stakeholders, which would be the patients. So in this case, who are the stakeholders that they're really aiming their findings to is parents with evidence-based guidance on how to manage their children's TV. So we can really see here that overlap between argument and claims, right? So that's one example. Now, what have I said here? What's the difference? Yeah, okay, I've said what's the difference. We've already talked about that. All right, cool. Let's keep going. Um, so we've had someone share, which is fantastic. If anyone else would like to share about their claims, that would be great. But I guess my point is to be really clear on the difference between the problem and the claims, right? So again, what we say, the problem is the thing that's impacting. So actually, if we go back to our chat, and my claim, you've got a design framework for digital health products. So what's the problem? I'm going to take a guess that the problem is your e-health teams need some guidance to deliver the best healthcare. Is that, am I kind of around?
Ye- Yeah. Well, one of the problems,
Hmm.
and that's actually interesting when you frame it that way, because I don't, because you're right, but I don't know that I've actually made that aspect of the problem clear within my writing.
So we've reversed engineered basically,
Mm,
right? This is why the research is important because you're going to come up with this great resource, which is going to be valuable for the practitioners. So then if we go back to what the problem is, that and it's not like you're saying, oh, these people aren't qualified or experienced and don't know what they're doing. That's not what you're saying at
mm,
all. But
mm,
but of course, if there's a framework or a resource that will help them get the information that they need more quickly, maybe, because
hmm
they're on the telephone, they want to answer as many calls as they can. So the problem probably and then maybe it's also something like making sure that everybody's giving similar advice
Mm,
potentially, because you've talked about it being a foundational resource. So it's interesting, isn't it, to kind of go backwards then and reverse engineer. So if this is
mm,
the
mm.
solution, what exactly is the problem or the argument? And you probably, when we look at your writing later, I'm sure we'll find it in there. Maybe, as you
True.
say, it needs to be a little bit more clear.
Mhm.
All right, so let's look at some exemplars if that's okay, and then we'll get into your writing, everyone who wants to share. So now just give me a moment and I'll grab the activity sheet. Okay, excellent. So here we are. I'm hoping you can see that document okay. Let's scroll down. I don't want to make you dizzy. Sorry, sorry. While we're here, let's look at these 10 types of claims. So again, she's saying you know, you don't have to be able to label your claim. You just have to be able to recognize it and know it and say it. And again, I like this. Aligns with the problem and the entry point. Okay. So, which we saw in that violence on TV. So, subject based claim, it could be audience based, because remember, I think all of you would have an audience based claim, right? Because you've selected the appropriate journal. Literature based, this is you, Ali, I reckon. Practice based,
Yep.
extends
Yep.
or corrects. Yeah, yeah, good. Methods based, some of you might have that. I wouldn't make that your only claim though. Methods based. But it could be one because you've used a different methodology that most people in your field don't usually use. I feel like you'll all have something kind of findings based. You're going to shed new light. Maybe it's specific to your discipline. Some people might have theory based. That'd be a very particular type of article, though, wouldn't it? Implications and recommendations. So you can see how these really do overlap quite a lot. But I think most of you would have findings based, practice based, um, and subject based. So it's the importance for the person, text, group, or problem that you have taken as your subject. Okay. So again, this is our so what. This is what's going to, what your research is going to reveal and provide to your stakeholders and, of course, to the body of knowledge. All right. So let's have a look at our activity. I always put this about the examples won't be in your field of study. They just won't. I'll be pretty sure. So, and sometimes people get a little bit like, what can I know? I don't know this topic. And I, part of what we do with these exemplars is to help you to actually feel good as you're reading and confident. Your readers, and there's no right or wrong either. You feel what you feel about what you've written, whether it's good, whether it's not so good. Um, but the things that we're looking for is the argument, the claims. Maybe we can find out which type, but that's probably not as useful. This is really important. How long do we find out? Now, remember, we're reading abstracts, okay? Got to be in there, okay? Um, and the alignment. We'll see if we can see that. Um, Actually, no, these are introductions, not abstracts. This is something to consider as well about your literature review because let's face it, that's where you're going to be talking about the gaps most likely. Um, Sometimes the introduction and lit review are separate, so just double check what your journal does. All right, let's have a look. Yes, so this is one of my favorite ever articles, which we looked at the abstract last time, because when we were unpacking abstracts. So look at the audience, Australian field ornithology. So the people reading this are into birds, okay, and all sorts of birds. Here's the title: Australian magpies cooperate to remove tracking devices. All right, so what are we looking here for? The problem, the claims, how explicit is it? and also, or are they? And also, how long do we have to wait? All right. So I'm going to do a bit of highlighting as we go through. Understanding patterns of animal movement is an essential step towards comprehending both large and fine scale ecological and behavioral patterns. Now, what did I just say before? Please try and make the first sentence your voice. What does my first example do? Not use their voice. However, I my proviso here is I wonder if it's to do with the field. Okay. I still would prefer the first sentence to be the author's voice. I really think that's important, but we're gonna that's not what they have here. So that's okay. And actually, look that we don't see the researchers' voice of themselves, their own voice for quite a while. Oh yeah, there's one. That's a sentence without a citation. Anyway, okay, so this is the topic animal movement because we want to know their ecological and behavioral patterns. So that's our topic, right? Research in this field is of value not only to behavioral and evolutionary ecologists, but it also increases the effectiveness of conservation. So here's another thing, right? A topic. These are all reasons that we want to do this research. Yet, it is only relatively recently that we have developed the technology required to track individuals or populations at fine scales remotely and accurately and store the data. So, what's going on here? I'd say that this is a bit of a gap, right? But a gap in practice, maybe not so much knowledge. Mm, maybe. In recent years, we've got the GPS for more and more sophisticated and precise studies, another citation. But then we've got this major constraint. So I feel like that's the problem. Okay. It's the size of the tracking. Then they go on, they're too small, the species, the size and weight of their battery, charged batteries are required, but also for storage and data. Small batteries are unable to keep a charge for long periods of time and limited to solar panels, which add weight and blah, blah, blah. So all of this is really the problem, isn't it? All the way through here. It is therefore important that we continue to improve tracking technologies to allow for the tracking of smaller animals as well as the means of recharging, blah, blah, blah. So, so far in this first paragraph, I feel like we have a problem, an argument that we need better tracking devices. Is there a claim for significance at this point? What do you think?
Is it about the that last line there, how it would be advantageous for animal tracking studies?
I think so. We need a controlled remote system that enables battery charging and or removal of a tracker for animal tracking studies. Yeah, I think so. And this is in the literature. We've developed, it's only recently, okay, but still we haven't really had too much for for the birds. So it's there. And I think even up here, the ecological and behavioral patterns and conservation, we can all understand. So we can be like, okay, this makes sense. We need to track the birds to figure out what they're doing, right? So that's okay. So let's have a look at this second paragraph. The ability of new GPS tracking to give greater insight is well established. However, there we go. There's been little tracking done on passerines because of their general small size. Is that a problem? Is that a gap? It's a gap, right? This study proposed to investigate the possibility, la la la. And then how about this? One novel aspect was the development of a passive release mechanism because it talks about above that the release mechanisms are no good. Um, la 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 la. and that's what they're going to add in. So their claims are practice based. And I do feel like they're argued well enough for why we would care about this study. I think that they have. And also, don't forget that we're not the audience as such, but I feel like that it's still been written well enough, this introduction, for us to be like, okay, this research would be valuable for the people that are going out and tracking the birds. And it's not just for these particular birds. If it works, it's going to be used for other bird life, maybe, as they say, smaller mammals. Um, so, yeah, do find it very interesting that there's so many citations at the beginning. Um, And then even here, well, that you would need citations there anyway. Yeah, and they've got a novel aspect. So yeah, I'm convinced. Whether or not we can, you know, the problem and the claims for significance are there. I think sometimes it can be more explicit though. Um, but they're reporting on their project that they did. And spoiler alert, what happened was the magpies cooperated to undo the tracking devices within seconds. So crazy. Yeah, they just like worked together and the other one pecked at it and it just fell off. So, so yeah, not as successful as they wanted. All right, let's have a look at another one. Oh, this is a good one because it's about us developing a community of research practice. This is a pretty big journal, British Educational Research Journal. So the audience is people like me. Um, let's have a look. So developing a community of research practice. Okay, so this is the introduction. Every higher education culture has drivers for journal article writing. Academics must engage with the range of forces if they are to publish regularly. The requirement to publish is unequivocal, and failure to publish has been represented as professional misconduct. For academics, this failure can directly affect research fundings. Um, for example, if they don't publish, their findings will not improve patient care in the health. However, although there may be financial and moral consequences, we do not yet know why some writers do not publish. There you go. There's the problem, is what I would say, right? We don't know why some writers don't publish when we take into consideration all of these reasons why they should, right? So next one, in most university settings, writing and writers are subject to individual and or institutional assessment. La la la. Research assessment is not the subject of critique, but it provides the context. So again, she's arguing why her research is important, right? So there's a context for why research writing, why we should investigate it. La la la. There we go. And then there has been no exploration of how their writing practices develop. So this would be the gap, right? So we all know we should publish. People do, some people don't, but it'd be good to understand how writing practices are developed. So that what could we do? We could then utilize that knowledge to help other people to get published. Um, there is growing literature on researcher development, but much less on writers' development. So, and again, claim for significance is around the gap here, right? That we don't know. We just don't know. La 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 la. There we go. So it is appropriate to revisit the question of how the writing and publishing dimensions of research productivity may be explained and how writers' understanding of the nature of journal article writing can be developed. So again, here's our problem, right? Although the imperative to publish is widely accepted, we need to know more about how it's achieved. And how do we do that? We listen to academics' accounts of how they work. Okay, and so this is what she's done. So that's kind of like her topic. Um, it's not representative, so she's got her caveat. It's not representative of all writers, but I present here to make visible some of the writing processes of writing for publication, to highlight strategies these writers found useful, and to make a case for the development of communities of research and practice. So what's that? So pretty clear. There's a problem. We don't know what the writers why some do, why some don't. Even though there's all these forces telling us we need to, it's a bit of an invisible process of how writing practices are developed. So let's listen to academics' accounts, and then that'll make some of those processes visible. So again, I feel like the problem is there. I feel like the so what, why do we care is there. Again, but we have to kind of not work hard, but we've got to find it, you know. So you can, when you're reading articles from your target journal, I want you to have a look at the introduction and see how they word the argument and the claims for significance and the gaps, and figure out if you want to be even more explicit and say something like, this paper argues blah, 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 blah. The value of this finding is blah, 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 blah. And then, because you can see if we're more explicit about those things, who's it easier for? It's easier for the reader. And I'm not saying that these aren't easy for us to read, but we're having to really concentrate, right? To figure out, okay, so here's the problem and here's why it's important. I think we should almost finish up. I'm going to skip out of writing the literature review. Let's see if there's a short one. Oh, yeah. See how I snuck in this one about peer feedback? Let's look at that one and then we'll get into your writing. All right. When's this from? 2018. Let's look at the title, Peer Feedback Improves Students' Academic Self-Concept in Higher Education. And then look at this, Research in Higher Education. So again, up my alley, people who have jobs like mine as well. And definitely that's something that I'm super interested in as well. So let's have a look. And straight up, they not only have a citation to start, they've got a quote in there as well. Again, I still think the first sentence should be your voice. And then second sentence is a citation. Oh no, next one isn't. And I'm not anti-citations, okay, at all. Of course, they are essential. I just really want the researcher's voice at the beginning. Anyway, right. The Higher Education Funding Council for England states that effective feedback helps learners to progress with confidence and skill as lifelong learners. Good quote. One type of feedback is peer feedback that has become an increasingly central aspect for learning and teaching strategies in higher education. Interesting. You know what else though? 2018, this was published. Look at these sources. 2010. I'm sure they could have found something, more closer to 2018. But anyway, so there's our topic. Okay, we're pretty clear on that, which is lucky because that's what the title says. Um, okay, it's an increasingly central aspect for learning and teaching strategies. Okay, good. Peer feedback engages students in their own learning process while taking both the roles of an examiner and examinee. Thus, this teaching method initiates an active and self-directed learning process. Interesting again, which includes social interaction and reciprocal teaching. Okay, so we haven't got a problem yet, have we? We've got a good topic though. There exists a large body of literature about various aspects. What's going on there? and effective practices implementing peer feedback in traditional classroom instruction. Okay, so still topic, still no problem. New technologies being available initiated a trend towards the employment of a blended learning approach in online learning environments, blah, 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 resulting peer feedback gets further relevant as interactivity of learners, including feedback, is a key component of online learning. For example, blah, 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 blah. Okay, holy cow. What's the problem? We still don't know. Oh my goodness. Okay. So this is all about the topic. All right, let's see next. However, now I'm going to do that in red, and you want to know why? Please don't start a paragraph with a transition signal. However, what? This is a new paragraph, right? I'm sorry to these people. I'm sure they're fantastic and it's a great article, but yeah, please don't start a new paragraph with a transition signal. All right. Previous research in higher education almost exclusively focused on the effects of peer feedback on learning processes and academic achievement. Okay. Much less is known, okay, about the effects of peer feedback on academic outcomes other than academic performance. Interesting. Okay, so still not a problem though, but it is a gap. The role of intrapersonal and interpersonal competencies is currently highlighted by higher education researchers and policymakers in order to support student success. Universities should therefore go beyond teaching only intellectual skills, but also foster achievement-related competencies related to academic self-concept. So is this the problem? Universities should therefore go beyond teaching only intellectual skills. So are they saying universities only teach intellectual skills? Maybe. There is strong evidence that ASC affects students' learning and persistence when faced with failure. As peer feedback enhances students' academic achievement, it might simultaneously improve the achievement-related construct of academic self-concept. I don't know then, is that the problem? Maybe. There has been much empirical support, thus high is associated. To our knowledge, the present study is the first to investigate the effects of peer feedback on ASC instead of achievement. Okay. All right. Again, I don't know. A lot of words here, isn't it? And we still don't really. Yeah, I guess, yeah. I mean, so well, taking something from Belcher, they're looking at something new about something old by focusing specifically on ASC. But yeah, I really would have wanted something a little bit sooner. Um, and what's the claim for significance? I've kind of made it that, haven't I? It's the first to investigate the effects of peer feedback on academic self-concept. So a bit of a strange one. Bit of a strange one. All right. I think we should turn it over to looking at some of your writing. So just one second.